Hey folks, my name is SecBase Unlimited. I am a very occasional DF streamer and level author. And today I'm going to be doing a run through of my award-winning, it still feels so weird to say, contest level, the Undermined. Quick bit of background, about 2 months ago now, DF21 organized a contest to make a level that was an extension of the iconic early, 1997 era Dark Forces level Mines. My entry came first, which is still absurd. I still think Fisher should have won, but I digress. Fish did a commentary on his level a couple of weeks back. So I thought it'd be a good idea for me to do the same, especially since a few people were a little confused as to what was actually happening in the level sometimes. So to kick things off, I'm actually going to show you I'm going to show you folks a slightly different level. This is one that I actually worked on for, I think, a couple of days or something back in around 2010 or so. I think I even shared some screenshots to the DF21 forum at one point. And once I've finished playing it, it should be fairly obvious sort of why I'm playing this level first. So, here we go. For technical purposes, I'm playing this in the Force engine, the hardware accelerated version, but 640 by 480. So if anything's a little bit like not normal DF, that's why. Now, if anyone's been paying attention to the geography of this level, it might look a little bit familiar. So yeah, this level is called Mines Revisited. The concept was to take the basic sort of physical map layout of mines and make a authentic level based off of it. Basically treat the original Minds as a rough first draft and then expand a bit from there. All of the enemies or objects in a level were only the enemies, objects and whatnot that show up in the original Minds, and every item that shows up in Mind shows up at least once. So like rock.wax, the red light, all of the original enemies. That's why there's no other weapons besides the Stormtrooper rifle. Yeah, that was the design thinking, basically. And then, yeah, there's just like tiny bits of stuff that doesn't like sort of portend to the original Mind's architecture, but that only shows up once you would theoretically go through the equivalent of the Void Door. Yeah, never ended up releasing this because I wasn't super happy with the final result. Just things like that. Wasn't super happy with like the textures that I've made and stuff like that, but occasionally consider like revisiting the concept, because it's not quite good enough to be like a proper good level, and it's not quite bad enough to be enough. Anyway, so when the DF21 Minds contest was announced, originally thought I went back to what I'd thought of for this when I was thinking, what would I want to do for the new Minds contest? Oh yeah, the big door I was actually really happy with. I'm quickly going to run back to that just to show it off. So, this door over here, the way that raises up, shouldn't technically be possible in the Dark Forces engine. In fact, in early versions of Dark Excel in the Force engine, this actually kind of broke the program. Shouldn't have gone down there. My bad. The way it works is that there's a bunch of small sectors around the door, and when the door's raised up, all of those sectors, their ceilings are raised up as well. And the architecture's designed so that it's like not super obvious when the door's like rising outside of where it possibly could. Anyway, so when the Minds contest was announced, I had a couple of like first ideas of what I might want to do with it. I was thinking like, oh, I could maybe take this level and then turn that into an actual contest entry. The problem was that it that particular level would start in the opposite spot. Like, the whole point of this particular joke level Minds Revisited was that it should slowly come across to the player that they realize they're just playing Minds, whereas the contest required that you started off in Minds itself. So, but then I thought, well, my original prospect was to take Minds and make a good level out of it. What if I instead made it so that Minds had always been a good level and something had happened to change things at the last minute? Other ideas I had, I've joked about this a few times, but I thought, you could just have like an Ewok strip club sitting out the side, but again, that'd be a bit of a non sequitur. The other thing I thought might happen would be you just start playing normal Minds, and then when you went to get the Death Star plans, they'd comically rise out of the roof, and the rest of the level would be like some kind of detective mystery trying to figure out where the heck they'd gone. But instead, well, let's play the actual level to find out what I went with. So this is all just the original Minds as it shows up, same as 1997. Obviously being played in the Force engine, so it might be a tiny bit different. And the first sort of thing that I wanted to happen was that as soon as you went for the Death Star plans, that's when things would start to go a bit weird. So as you notice right now, the door to nothingness isn't actually open, and also this whole sector doesn't really show up on the map. It's key to a different map layer, but I think it's like not even visible there. So as soon as you go for it, you instead fall into the abyss.
My child, something is wrong with this world.
For reference,
I feel a siphon. Our essence is waning.
The way that you fall into the abyss is basically there's a teleportation INF connected to the sector that has the fake Death Star plans.
Before it is too late.
And as soon as that whole dialogue with the fake Death Star plans happens, you get shunted out by way of a morph move. And this is actually a completely different sector now, because if it was the original sector, then you'd just be teleported right back into the abyss scene, as it were. So there's about 3 or 4 different sectors, all occupying the same space. And the INF to juggle where exactly the player is a little bit confusing. The Death Star plans with the one floating eyeball, I forget exactly what inspired me to do that. I might have just been thinking of a Kako demon from Doom. But I think just if you look at the plans themselves, the sort of green chip right in the center is a little bit bigger than the other ones, and so it always kind of looked a little bit like an eyeball to me, and then with the little circuit connectors at the bottom, kind of looked like teeth as well. So you're back in the ending of the original Mines, and the doorway to nothingness has opened up. I was thinking of ways to make it just still be made out of HOMS, but I thought just for completeness' sake and to make sure it didn't look weird in future versions of the Force engine, the effect is just done with a skybox, basically. I took a screen cap of the original Hall of Mirrors effect, and then just turned it into a sky texture. And it works well enough. It's like obviously not the same as the actual Hall of Mirrors effect, but it works well enough for someone who's walking towards it. You might notice it's something a bit odd. As you can see down there, there's a pitch black sector which the player has to fall into. If you try going back at this point, this door stops working, and it can't be opened up by the enemies still in the original area if you happen to fall on there, or like if they happen to still be alive. So go down here, you have no idea what to do. Oh look, there's a crack in the world essentially. There's a pretty basic texture. There's an accompaniment on the other side. If things look a little bit different to the Undermined that folks have played, it's actually because I'm playing this on the about to be released 1.1 edition, which includes slightly changed item placements and enemy placement. It includes a full set of difficulty settings, and there's like 1 or 2 tiny changes to the environment. But for the most part, things should be much the same. Speaking of which, the repeater rifle down there, I noticed that most people didn't even realize it was there. So I made it a bit more obvious in the easier difficulty settings. And there's another one, I think, a bit later on in the level, in case people miss it.
There he is, stop him!
So this is the main courtyard of the facility, as I like to put it. The backstory of the level, like as it's supposed to be conveyed, is that those pesky Imperials, somehow they've managed to figure out how to take the essence of good Dark Forces levels and suck them out, leaving these strange alien husks like the original Mines. So Kyle, who in this version I guess is a disciple of the Floating Death Star plans, has to shut down the facility and bring back goodness to the assorted worlds. I'm not sure exactly how obvious that story is as you're playing through. I try to incorporate a few things here and there to like convey what's happening, but yeah, I don't know if everyone necessarily got it. So if the player does try going back this way to get back into the level, to the original Mines,
I am sorry, child. Your return will have to wait.
He gets politely told to buzz off by the plans. This is for, like, the reason why you can't re-enter the original Mines is because this warehouse here physically isn't actually big enough to hold the original Mines level layout. If you look at the map, the original Mines, most of it is still over this way, because the size of the original Mines is actually massive. If you draw a line from left to right, it goes for about 600 DF units, and vanilla Dark Forces starts having issues when you have areas that are long within about 200 to 250 DF units. So that's why I sort of condense things down here. So there's a lot of trickery to make sure that things stay inside spaces so they're not screwing with the engine. So one of the few changes I made to version 1.1 here is that there is now a doorway here. The reason I did that is because in a moment we're going to flip the switch that sucks all the goodness out of this level here, and I wanted to make it a bit more obvious to the player that they're supposed to start going in this direction after that. Obviously, this whole area is not particularly large, and if someone does flip that switch and doesn't know where to go, they should hopefully be able to come across the doorway later on, but I just wanted to make it a little bit more obvious. What was the origin of the Cthulhu secret plans? Asked Kayala. So the origin of the plans was basically just my thinking was I wanted to have something happen to the plans, which means you couldn't play them straight away. I still needed them to be in their original spot, but I just thought it would be really funny if it was the plans themselves that told Kyle where to go, like sort of a vision quest or a peyote trip. So yeah, I just went, okay, cool, let's make it so that the plans themselves are sentient. I gave them the big eyeball to sort of show that. I can't like show it right now because that whole area isn't accessible, but the big void that the plans are floating in, the plans are very slowly floating up and down, and I achieved that with a second altitude elevator, which is key to the plans themselves, which is also why you can't walk through them, because to make sure that would actually work, there's invisible walls all around them, and if those weren't there, Carl would be able to just like fall through underneath the second altitude and plummet to his death, and obviously I didn't want that to happen. It does also mean that it's possible to get like caught on some walls in that Vision Quest area and not like get transported out properly. But if that happens, you can just like wheel yourself a little bit. I don't think there's any spots where you're completely stuck. If there are, I do apologize. So yeah, one of the changes I made to version 1.1 is that all of these elevators now use switches. That's because originally these elevators could only be called from the outside, and then you just had to sit here and wait a few seconds before they went back up. That wasn't very satisfying, but I had to do it like that because otherwise, if you could activate the elevators while standing on them, then when you were trying to press that switch up there, you would also activate the elevator at the same time and go back down, and that just felt a little bit silly. So instead, I just keep everything to switches now.
Stop where you are.
So here we have our first like sign of a realm that hasn't been affected by the siphoning machine yet. I didn't want to make things too complicated because most of this was done over the course of one day, but it's supposed to be just a tranquil setting. But everything in here is somewhat represented in the same area when it gets all of its goodness sucked out of it. So for example, you notice there's this little pagoda-like area, there's a little lighthouse, and there's also just like this little wall here. Again, this is something added in 1.1 because the architecture wasn't too obvious in the original. When I press this switch, audio provided by my good friend Melanie Ravineshi. So this area's opened up again, and as you can see, things have gone a little bit south. The walls and ceiling are horribly messed up. A set of thermal detonators has turned into a whole bunch of brands. I wasn't sure exactly what I should put here originally. I just thought it might be funny to see a couple of brands, and then when I did my first playtest, they all just, half of them killed each other off in the first time, and I just had to sit there and laugh for like a good 5 minutes. It was great. But yeah, so this has just a whole bunch of bits of architecture that don't really make any sense and are of the same sort of quality as the original mines. Fun fact, I actually built this area first and then extrapolated what I'd done for this area to create the more tranquil scene afterwards. One other thing I've added to version 1.1, because the original version of the Undermined didn't have any secret areas, I thought I should just put one little secret area in things for this version. So yeah, now that the siphoning machine has been turned on, we can go into here. And because this elevator has the same side textures as all the others, try to keep things somewhat uniform. You know that we can use this to go to the next area. Fun fact, this ship here was one of the first things I designed for the level. Not for any particular reason, but I decided fairly early on that I wanted to have a ship. The idea of the level being that, like, I think originally I was going to have a pipe going to the ship from the siphoning machine to make it a bit more obvious that the Imperials were possibly taking the essence of good levels off-world or something. In the end, I couldn't actually put the pipe here because this ship is so complicated that in vanilla, having like one or two more adjoins in this sector would have led to massive HOMs. So my design process for this one in particular, I was just thinking I wanted to have something that looked a bit more like some of the Imperial ships you see in some of the more recent films, like Rogue One with the cargo shuttle, or I think the TIE Silencer from the sequel trilogy, how they look more black and sleek. And I also just wanted to have like a sector-built ship that didn't look like any of the sector-built ships people are used to in Dark Forces. So that red engine texture is like one of the red door textures, just positioned in a particular spot, so it's not so obvious that it's a door. And I think most of the other textures are taken from like Imperial City. So take this elevator down. I have to deal with a couple of interrogator droids. I think this might have been a nod to Mind Visited as well, because in Mind Visited, obviously there's interrogator droids, which feels like it's just sort of shoehorned in there. So again, I just had these ones sort of sitting here where they're not really making too much of a fuss. Fun fact, if you were to like send this lift back up, you could originally get stuck down here, but there's a elevator to make it go down again. Also, essentially this little section with the interrogator droids, it's entirely there because I wanted to make sure that like the textures up the top and the textures down the bottom looked different. So I just put a little sector there to like have it as a border, and then I thought, may as well put something in there. So can't go this way because we don't have the yellow key yet. It's very hard to find like yellow textures in the regular Dark Forces texture gob. So I just improvised there, went with like the yellowest thing I could find. If we go into the ship, a bunch of officers. If they're not alerted, you can use a thermal detonator on them, and it's a lot of fun. Again, this is all pretty straightforward for Dark Forces ship design. Also in the first version of the Undermined, there were far too many troopers in this area. I apologise, that was just a side effect of doing all the playtesting at about 3 AM my time. I can go this way. Where I found the officers. So having the, I guess, turning off switch just say emergency stop felt a bit on the nose, but at the same time, it kind of works. Turns off. A few Dark Troopers to deal with. What am I thinking? So I've got a lot of thermal detonators now, obviously, because I dealt with that one, like, siphoned area. But if someone comes in here and they don't have any ammunition left, yeah, I wanted to make sure there were plenty of explosives to work with in these sections. Fun fact, if both of these Dark Troopers died at the same time, originally it would sometimes lock up the INF, because the elevator that turns all the stuff back on waits for two separate bosses dead signals, but if they both die at the same time, it gets a bit confused. So in this case, if both of those did die at the same time, it would automatically open itself up after about 15 to 20 seconds. But now we've turned off the siphoning machine, and that means that everything should be good back up there. And as a side of note, you can go back to the original peaceful realm up there, but I don't know why I do want to. I don't think anything up there has changed since before. So now we return, and the geography of this area, once again, was designed or based off of the layout of the original mines. So we have this sort of large D-shaped area. We have what was originally a submerged bridge in the mines area, just turned into a floating bridge. I was thinking about making this area possibly a bit more complex, adding like a couple of shrubs or something to like represent the original items, but I thought it might be good just like to keep things fairly straightforward, tranquil, if you will.
Well done, my child. You have truly earned your prize.
And now we can finally collect the Death Star plans. And that should be the end of the level. Yep. So, that's the entirety of Mind Visit of the Undermined. Most of this was made over the course of about a day, I think it was. So if anyone has any questions about my design process or any of the special effects involved, please feel free to ask in the chat. Also, oh yes, yeah, having like little bits of environment that like very slowly move is I don't know, makes things feel just a little bit more realistic. One other thing I forgot to mention is that once the boss fight's over and the siphoning machine's been turned off, the big black menacing ship in the this area. This gets turned into sort of a very rudimentary Dark Forces cube ship. Again, originally there was supposed to be a pipe going here, but it's sort of to point out the fact that like all of that siphoning energy has been fed back into their original locations. Oh man, maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have put some pumps in there, some secrets in there. I draw this on paper first, or did I design everything in the editor? I think it was sort of... I did design it all in the editor first, technically, but rather than doing it all sort of freeform, I did a couple of rudimentary shapes. So what I essentially did was I built a large circular sector that would eventually become the ship area. I built 2 rectangles that were going to become the warehouses. So the reason why all of these are like at evenly spaced apart is because they were sort of drawn on the top of these large rectangles that had all the indents set up and everything. And then I think this middle section, like I had the sort of layout in my head because this whole thing was fairly straightforward. But yeah, most of it was just done in WDFUs with a few areas been moved over here and there. I do design a couple of levels on paper sometimes, but most of the time I find it easier to visualize things if they're in the 3D space, which is one of the reasons why I really appreciate the 3D preview option of WDFUs 3. It makes being able to like position everything that much easier. Speaking of pipes, one of the few custom components I did make for this level was this little pipe 3DO. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I just wanted to make it fairly clear that what was happening in here would lead into what was happening in here. Any other questions? Alright, well, I think that just about covers everything. So, thanks for joining me, folks. Just going to shut off the stream in I'm not going to shut off the stream in a second, but I'm going to turn off the video. But I appreciate you folks joining me for this, and I'll be sending over the Undermined version 1.1 to DF21 in just a moment. Oh, one last thing. The reason why I call it the Undermined, it's 2 reasons actually. Firstly, it was to represent like Kyle and the Death Star plans being members of this other dimension that was being undermined by the forces of the Empire. So the Undermined specifically refers to Kyle and the plans in that regard. The other reason is because if we go back to the original Mines environment and turn on LA data, so everything up here is at Y level 0, right? And the entire rest of the level is at Y level minus 32 to about 0. So everything here is quite literally happening under Mines. So yeah, apologies for the terrible, terrible pun, but I had to. Thanks, folks. I will see you all around.